The Marlowe Street Murders, Part 1. Chapter 1, The Ink Arrives Early. London, 1893. The rain had been falling since dawn, soaking the cobblestones of Marlowe Street until the gutters whispered secrets in rivulets of dirty water. Alistair Graves stood beneath the iron awning of number 17, his black gloves speckled with the fine mist of morning drizzle. The constable beside him fidgeted, nervous and underdressed for the cold. "Tell me again," Graves said, voice even but sharp as a scalpel. "Why was this not reported last night?" The constable cleared his throat. "Apologies, sir. The landlady thought he'd overslept. Said he always took his tea past 10. Only raised alarm when she saw the Times outside his door, dry, but printed for today." Graves turned. "Today?" "Aye, sir. Dated the 12th. Graves said nothing. He pushed open the flat's door and stepped inside. The apartment was modest, clean, and undisturbed. No signs of forced entry. No broken glass. No blood. Only the man, Horace Ellison, mid-60s, accountant, bachelor, slumped at his desk, head bowed over an inkwell as if he'd fallen asleep mid-letter. But the hand was limp. The ink had long since dried. The pen rested in fingers gone cold. Jonathan Whitmore was already there, his spectacles fogged from the warmth inside. No wounds. No struggle. "Looks peaceful," he said. "Looks," Graves echoed. He stepped closer, examining the desk. There was no unfinished letter, no sign of work. Only a single folded page, placed deliberately to the left of the man's hand. Graves unfolded it slowly. It was a newspaper clipping. Fresh. Crisp. Dated tomorrow. Horace Ellison, 64, was found dead in his study at number 17 Marlowe Street. Beloved by few, forgotten by most. A heart grown tired before its time. Passed away in his chair, mid-sentence, as if interrupted by his own silence. There was no byline. No creases in the paper. No signs it had ever been inside the Times. Eleanor Blackwood stepped in from the hallway, brushing her coat clean. Neighbors saw no one enter. Locks untouched. Only item delivered was a single envelope last night, left at the doorstep around 2 a.m., by a man in a postman's uniform. Graves looked up. "Real postman?" "No record of delivery," she said. "And the actual post didn't arrive until 7. Graves stared at the obituary again. His brow furrowed, not in confusion, but recognition. "Have you seen something like this before?" Jonathan asked quietly. Graves didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the hearth and lifted the lid on the coal bin. Inside was a crumpled, burned page 2 of a newspaper. Still legible in places. It listed a second obituary. Tomorrow's date. Another name. "Who?" Eleanor asked. Graves read the line aloud. "Miss Abigail Norridge, 42, last seen alive outside St. Bartholomew's Theatre." "She's not dead," Jonathan said. "That's tonight." Graves folded the paper carefully and turned to his team. "Then we have until dusk to stop a death that's already been reported." Chapter 2, Curtain Call. By evening, the fog had thickened to a velvet curtain that hung low over the city. St. Bartholomew's Theatre, nestled in the heart of Covent Garden, wore its age-well, ornate columns, faded red banners, and a brass plaque that caught no light. It was nearly 7 p.m. when Alistair Graves arrived, cane in one hand, Abigail Norridge's obituary in the other. He stood at the theatre's entrance a moment, scanning the street. Carriages passed. A group of women laughed beneath their parasols. A street performer juggled knives just beyond the alley. Everything ordinary. Everything expected. And yet, Graves stepped beneath the gas lamp and read it again. Abigail Norridge, 42. Patron of the arts, vanished mid-performance. Gone without sound or struggle, leaving behind only an empty seat and a coat that did not belong to her. No one saw her leave. Some suspect she never did. Jonathan joined him at the curb, breath fogging in the air. I've spoken with the theater manager. She has a private box, balcony left. No guest tonight, just herself. And security? They check tickets, but no one watches the private boxes. Eleanor approached, dressed for the occasion in a high-collared coat and opera gloves. I'll take the seat behind her, 2 rows up. If someone tries anything, you'll act before they finish the thought, Graves said with a nod. Ezra had already disappeared into the shadows of the alleyway. All was set. The theater was nearly full by 7:45 p.m. The play, The Fool's Wake, a Gothic melodrama about a jester who impersonates his dead king to prevent a war. Not Graves' taste, but the audience seemed enthralled. From their various vantage points, each member of the team kept watch on Box 5. Abigail Norridge sat alone, wrapped in a shawl. Elegant, attentive, still. She held a small opera glass in gloved hands, eyes fixed on the stage. Nothing unusual. No movement. No visitors. No interruptions. At 8:16 p.m., the curtain fell on Act 1. Applause. Then, a moment later, a scream. Graves was already on his feet, moving swiftly toward the box. Eleanor was first through the side door, pistol drawn but hidden beneath her coat. The box was empty. No sound. Just a coat. Neatly folded. Elegant. But not hers. Jonathan stepped in a moment later. I saw no one enter. She never left. Eleanor touched the chair. Still warm. Graves scanned the space. No trapdoor. No fire exit. No disruption. Only the coat. And something beneath it. He pulled it out carefully. A folded page from the Times. He unfolded it slowly. Another obituary. Tomorrow's date. Jonathan Whitmore, 34. Trusted assistant and beloved scholar. Last seen leaving a performance at St. Bartholomew's Theatre, moments before he disappeared without a trace. Jonathan paled. That's not possible. Eleanor took it and scanned the fine print. Believed to be the 3rd victim in the Marlowe Street pattern. And possibly not the last. Graves folded the paper and tucked it into his coat. Then we'll break the pattern. Ezra met them near the alley's edge. No sign of her leaving, he said. No carriages. No back doors. But. He pulled a small envelope from his coat. Someone dropped this in the postbox just after 8. Marked urgent. He handed it to Graves. It was addressed in the same strange ink as the obituary. No return address. Inside. A single phrase. You're reading the story too slowly. Chapter 3, The Man Who Didn't Write It. The fog followed them. It wrapped itself around the wheels of the cab, crept between the seams of the doors, pressed against the windows like a silent passenger. Inside, the team sat in near silence, each absorbed in the same unspoken thought. The obituary had named Jonathan. Not as a future suspect. Not as a witness. As the next victim. Graves broke the silence. We're not dealing with a killer in the traditional sense, he said. These aren't warnings. They're announcements. Crafted, printed, and delivered before the act. Jonathan glanced at him, pale. Someone is publishing death before it happens. And using real newsprint, Eleanor added. That makes this not only murder, but manipulation of the press. Ezra scoffed from his corner. You think someone's using the Times to play God? No, Graves said softly. I think someone is using someone at the Times. That night, they arrived at a quiet side entrance of the Times headquarters on Printing House Square. Through a favor Graves called in from an old war correspondent, they were granted a brief window to examine the letterpress room. The printing hall was vast and mechanical, a place of steel teeth and rhythmic clatter, where tomorrow's headlines were still being typeset. The air smelled of hot ink and oil. The night editor, a stout man named Rigby, led them in with reluctance. I can only spare you 20 minutes, Mr. Graves. Papers must go to press by dawn. We won't need more than 10, Graves assured him. He approached the master printing logs. Are all obituary submissions logged? By hand, Rigby said. And approved by either the families or the city registrar. We don't take them lightly. Graves opened the logbook and flipped to the last 2 entries. Nothing. No record of Horace Ellison. No Abigail Norridge. Their obituaries had never been submitted. Jonathan scanned the typeset drawers. If they weren't submitted, who composed them? Rigby frowned. Impossible. You can't just sneak a story into the print line. Eleanor paced along the wall of retired linotype machines. Unless they're not using the press at all, she said. They're using something outside it. An off-hours machine. A retired press. One no one checks. Rigby rubbed his temple. Only one like that would be the Handwell, in the sub-basement. Decommissioned years ago. Left standing because the floor sank after a pipe burst, whole place half flooded. Ezra raised a brow. How delightfully ominous. Rigby led them down a narrow iron stairwell into the old sublevels of the printing house. The air grew thick with damp and ink-stained mildew. Water pooled underfoot. In the center of the dark space stood the Handwell, a massive black press, untouched in years. Its metal glistened under the lantern light, though no one had cleaned it. It was warm. Freshly used. Eleanor knelt and ran a gloved finger across the tray. Ink. Still wet. Jonathan opened a drawer. Inside, an obituary plate, still locked into place. Jonathan Whitmore, 34. The mind behind the detective. The heart behind the silence. Last seen on a rainy night, having finally understood the cost of a clue discovered too late. No timestamp. No signature. Just a handwritten note pinned to the edge of the plate. Don't interfere with your own ending. Graves stepped back, lips pressed thin. This isn't a prophecy, he murmured. It's a performance. Someone's staging these deaths as acts, with published reviews written in advance. Ezra glanced up. So what's next? Graves didn't answer. He walked to the control lever of the old press. It had been wiped clean, except for one spot, where a fingerprint remained in the dust. He looked at it. Studied the shape. Small. Narrow. A woman's finger. Eleanor noticed his stare. What is it? Not a killer, Graves said quietly. A playwright. Chapter 4, The Theatre of the Dead. The next morning, fog still lingered over the Thames like a reluctant memory. Graves stood at his desk in the study of their Baker Street flat, the remnants of 4 obituaries spread before him. 3 had already come true. The 4th named Jonathan. The ink had dried. The clock ticked. But Jonathan still lived. Eleanor paced near the fireplace. We have to assume the next target won't be Abigail Norridge's replacement. They've escalated, this is a message. Jonathan looked up from his notes. The phrasing of each obituary reads like a script cue. Emotional framing, metaphor, stage direction hidden in grief. Ezra leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. What kind of killer writes eulogies before the murder? The kind that wants an audience, Graves said. He spread the pages out, side by side. Each obituary had been typeset identically, but with one detail purposefully altered in the margins, a small number, placed just beneath the final line. 1. The order isn't random, Graves said. It's a sequence. A scripted tragedy, and someone's watching the acts unfold. By midday, the team returned to St. Bartholomew's Theatre. The manager, a wiry man with nervous hands and gold spectacles, met them at the lobby doors. Graves got straight to the point. We need a list of everyone with access to the theater between midnight and dawn. Especially anyone who knows the layout of the private boxes. The manager blinked. Surely you don't suspect anyone here. Madame Norridge disappeared from inside your building, Eleanor said coldly. Either someone knows how to get in unseen or someone's being paid to look the other way. The man hesitated, then motioned them inside. The team was led through a maze of corridors to a narrow, musty room tucked behind the stage, the playwright's archive. It smelled of old ink and dust, lined with shelves of unused scripts, production notes, and forgotten tragedies. Jonathan examined the files. None of these are in performance rotation. Many never even premiered. But one stack of pages, freshly bound, stood out. Graves picked it up. No title. Just the word, rehearsals. He opened it. Inside, a script. And not just any script. Scene 1, the accountant. Scene 2, the theater widow. Scene 3, the scholar. The descriptions matched the first 3 victims, including Jonathan, whose scene was still pending. Scene 4 was already written. Graves read it aloud. Scene 4, the blade in the alley. A man waits in shadow, blade in hand, but not to harm. He listens. Watches. Until he sees the face he fears most, his own, walking toward him. Graves lowered the script slowly. Ezra muttered, "That's me." By nightfall, the team had moved to a narrow street off Drury Lane, one of Ezra's old haunts. He took position near a lamplight, watching, waiting. No one came. Until a figure stepped from the shadows. Not toward him. Past him. Same coat. Same gait. Same build. Ezra followed in silence, heart pounding. The figure stopped near a shopfront mirror. And turned. Ezra stared at himself. Not a reflection. A man in his exact image. And the moment they locked eyes, the man smiled. And vanished into the fog. Ezra returned to the team pale and quiet. Graves handed him the script. Ezra flipped to scene 4. At the bottom, now freshly written. Scene complete. And beneath it. Scene 5. Eleanor read the title aloud. The Woman with No Name. They all turned to her. Chapter 5, The Woman with No Name. Rain returned to London by midnight. The kind that falls in curtains, soft and heavy, enough to turn whispers into silence and shadows into shapes. Graves, Eleanor, Jonathan, and Ezra gathered once more in the study, the fire flickering low, steam rising from their coats as they stepped inside. Eleanor dropped the manuscript on the table. Scene 5. She flipped to the page she already knew would be there. She watches but is never seen. She listens, but no one remembers her voice. She walks in places no one records, and when she vanishes, no one files the report. Until tonight. Tonight, she enters the room where the story is being written. And burns it down. Jonathan leaned forward. That's not a death. That's a warning. Ezra raised an eyebrow. Or a promise. Graves scanned the final line at the bottom of the page. Exit, Eleanor Blackwood. He turned to her, but Eleanor was already pacing. This isn't prophecy. It's manipulation, she said. Someone's using theater, scriptwriting, as a framework for murder. They're assigning scenes, roles, and exits. But why the theater motif? Jonathan asked. Why not simply send a list? Why the dramatics? Graves answered without looking up. Because for the author, this isn't murder. It's a play. And we're still in rehearsal. That night, Eleanor returned alone to her flat in Holborn Row, despite the team's protests. She agreed to a watch, but insisted they remain 2 blocks off, unseen. She lit no lamps. Boiled no tea. Just waited in the dark. As the rain tapped against her windows, she began examining her past. There had been threats before. Letters. Even an attempt on her life in Calais. But this was different. This was personal. At midnight, a knock. Not at the door. At the rear window. Eleanor rose slowly, revolver in hand. The window fogged slightly. A finger traced words into the glass from outside. Scene 5 ends now. She flung the window open, aimed her revolver. But the alley was empty. Only a small leather satchel rested against the bricks below, soaked in rain. She climbed down into the alley. Opened it. Inside, a bundle of ash, the scent of burned parchment, and a silver lighter, engraved with a single phrase. She never had a name. The next day, the team returned to the British Library, Graves leading them into a rarely accessed section of the archive, the theatrical records room, an enormous space of original plays, scripts, and band productions. He handed a reference slip to the archivist. A request to view an unfinished script titled Rehearsals. The archivist frowned. We don't have that title on record. You do, Graves said. It was submitted under a pseudonym. She left. Returned minutes later, pale. There's no copy of the manuscript. But we have this. She handed them an envelope. Inside, a faded photograph. 4 men and 1 woman, seated on a theater stage. The back read. The original cast of Rehearsals, 1874. Graves pointed at the woman. No name. No record. No costume. Just a face. Sharp. Watchful. Familiar. Jonathan looked closer. Wait. That's. Eleanor nodded slowly. She looks exactly like me. Graves turned the photograph over again. Someone had added a second line recently, fresher ink, in different handwriting. She rewrites the story each time. You're playing her part now. Eleanor whispered, that's what the scene meant. I'm not supposed to die. I'm supposed to become her. Jonathan exhaled. So what now? Graves looked at the photo, then at the burned satchel. She's not the next victim. He looked at Eleanor. She's the next author. Chapter 6, Rehearsals begin again. Rain fell steadily against the windows of the British Library's reading room. Eleanor sat alone beneath a green glass lamp, the photograph from 1874 spread before her. Her eyes lingered on the unnamed woman. Same dark eyes. Same angular jaw. Same sharp presence. But something deeper still, the same silence. She could feel it now. A memory not her own. As if the story had begun writing her. While Graves and Jonathan returned to the theater to press the manager for more production records, Eleanor requested access to the special collection of prohibited works, a locked archive beneath the East Wing, reserved for plays and texts banned for inciting unrest, hysteria, or worse. With her clearance, she was escorted down a spiral staircase into a chamber that smelled of wet velvet and dusted ash. The clerk, Mr. Lorimer, handed her a slim black ledger. Every production refused by the Crown or pulled from the boards before completion. There's not much from that decade, save one. He slid a file toward her. Rehearsals. Unknown playwright. Submitted anonymously. Dated 1874. Marked, unfinished. Inside were 5 pages. Handwritten. Unbound. In a woman's delicate script. Eleanor turned the pages slowly. Scene 1, the accountant. Scene 2, the theater widow. Scene 3, the scholar. Scene 4, the blade in the alley. Scene 5, the woman with no name. She turned to the final page, blank. But only briefly. Ink began to appear, slowly, as if pulled from thought. Scene 6, the confession without witnesses. She blinked. Below the title, her name. Not Eleanor Blackwood. Written by her. Again. Back at St. Bartholomew's, Graves paced the darkened wings while Jonathan climbed to the private boxes. They found the manager again, pale and harried. No rehearsal scheduled for this week, he insisted. Nothing until Thursday's performance. Then why is the stage swept? Graves asked. Why are the ropes freshly coiled and the lights preset? The manager hesitated. There was someone. A woman. Said she needed to walk the stage for clarity. Spoke like a playwright. Said she used to perform here. Name? Didn't give one. Graves turned to Jonathan. It's not that someone is continuing the script. Someone's reopening it. As night fell, Eleanor returned to the theater on her own. She told no one. She needed to know whether the play would continue without her, or because of her. She found her way onto the stage, the house dark, the balconies empty. The silence wrapped around her like an old costume. She stepped to center stage. And stopped. A single candle flickered on the floor. At her feet, a new script page. She picked it up. It was in her own handwriting. But she had never written it. Scene 6, the confession without witnesses. She speaks. Alone. The house is empty. No one hears her truth. But the building does. The rafters. The ropes. The hidden lever beneath the stage floor. Because she is not here to be heard. She is here to be silenced. Eleanor dropped the page. And heard a click beneath the boards. She ran. Just as the trapdoor collapsed, swallowing the candle in a rush of fire and splinters. Graves burst through the side door moments later, pistol drawn, having followed a hunch. He found her outside the back exit, breathless, hands bleeding from climbing down the rear curtain rigging. They tried to burn the stage, she gasped. While I was on it. Graves looked at her carefully. No. They tried to burn scene 6. He pulled something from his coat. A telegram. Delivered just before he left. No sender. No date. It read. End the scene before it ends her. Back at their flat, Eleanor laid the surviving script pages on the desk. Graves poured tea without a word. Then said quietly. Someone is finishing a script that was never performed. Someone who knows each scene, because they've read it before. And someone who wants it acted out, so they can reach the final page. Jonathan looked between them. And if we reach the last scene? Graves answered. Then we meet the real author. Chapter 7, the play that closed itself. Morning broke in a haze of grey. Fog crept low across London, as if reluctant to rise with the sun. Alistair Graves sat in the study chair, unmoving, the surviving pages of rehearsals spread before him like evidence from a crime no court could try. Scene 6 had nearly killed Eleanor. And still, there were pages left unseen. Which meant one thing. The play wasn't over. Not until its final act was performed. Jonathan entered, holding a telegram from the British Library. His face was pale. "It's gone," he said. "The manuscript. The 5 handwritten pages from the archive." "Gone?" Eleanor asked, stepping in behind him. "Stolen. Sometime before dawn. The pages were sealed in the restricted collection overnight. No signs of forced entry, but the drawer was open when the morning archivist arrived." Ezra muttered, "So much for the safest room in London." Jonathan continued, "No prints. But a single item was left in the drawer." He handed it to Graves. A single theatre ticket stub. Dated 1874. For a show titled Rehearsals. Time, 8 p.m. Seat, box 13. Graves stood. "There was no record of rehearsals ever premiering," he said. "No theatre claimed it, no cast remembered performing it." "But this ticket says otherwise," Eleanor whispered. "It did happen. At least once." Jonathan pointed to the back of the stub. "There's a symbol here, stylized quill over a flame. It's not part of any theatre mark I've seen." "I have," Graves said. "Once." He crossed the room and opened a drawer in his personal archive. From it, he pulled a bound notebook, his old case journal, from long before he met Eleanor or Ezra. He flipped through pages, each one filled with the meticulous precision of a man who'd long since memorized them. He stopped at a case titled "The Play That Closed Itself." 10 years ago, Graves investigated the abandoned Ashgrove Theatre, where a cast had vanished during rehearsals for an unnamed play. Only props remained, no blood, no bodies. Just a locked script, burned beyond legibility. The case went cold. Graves never found the author. But the only clue left was a quill over flame etched into the curtain rod above the stage. Now it was here again. Eleanor leaned over his shoulder. "The same playwright?" Graves nodded. "Or the same idea? Someone is resurrecting performances that were never meant to be finished." Ezra crossed his arms. "Which means whoever is directing this wants us to step into a final act." Jonathan murmured, "A performance that devours its cast." That evening, they returned to St. Bartholomew's Theatre. No scheduled performances. The house was closed. But Graves held the key they'd acquired through Scotland Yard's quiet persuasion. The theatre was dim, echoing. Eleanor led them up to box 13, on the upper left balcony, the seat listed on the stolen manuscript's ticket stub. They opened the door slowly. Inside, a small candle burning low. And on the seat, a program. Brand new. Clean paper. Printed that week. The cover. Rehearsals. A play in 7 scenes. Tonight, the penultimate act. Eleanor opened it. It listed cast members. Under, the detective, Alistair Graves. Under, the ghost of the unfinished, Eleanor Blackwood. Under, the voice of doubt, Jonathan Whitmore. Under, the knife in the dark, Ezra Renwick. And beneath it. Final scene, curtain fall. No other credits. No author listed. Suddenly, the candle sputtered, and went out. All 4 turned instinctively to the stage. A faint rustle. A silhouette moved across the curtain. Just one. Slim. Upright. Controlled. The figure paused at center stage. Then turned slowly toward them, toward box 13. Graves leaned forward. The figure raised one hand. And bowed. A curtain fell, by itself. And the figure vanished. They raced down the stairs, pushed through the wings of the stage, empty. No footprints. No breeze. No sound. But on the floor at center stage, they found a folded piece of parchment. The ink still wet. The final scene must be written by the detective, or the story begins again. Beneath it, a name scrawled in elegant, unfamiliar handwriting. Yours, L. Graves read it. Folded it. And whispered. I've seen that signature before. Chapter 8, Yours, L. The paper sat heavy in Graves' hand, as if the ink were still sinking in. The final scene must be written by the detective, or the story begins again. Yours, L. Eleanor leaned in. You recognize it? Graves nodded once. I saw it scrawled inside the ashtray of an abandoned dressing room. Years ago. During the Ash Grove investigation. Jonathan frowned. Ash Grove? The theater where the cast vanished? The same, Graves said. That note was burned into the porcelain with acid, like someone didn't want it to be erased. Like they needed it to remain. Ezra raised a brow. Who's L? Graves exhaled. That's the question I never answered. The next morning, they returned to the British Library, following up on the missing manuscript. The chief archivist, Mr. Lorimer, was waiting near the desk, visibly shaken. I reviewed the security log, he said, pulling out a folded list. No one entered or exited the archive between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. But he handed Graves a printout of the internal records. There's a gap. Exactly 4 minutes. At 3:03 a.m., the system logs went dark. Tampering? Eleanor asked. Possibly, Lorimer said. But there's more. This morning I found this. He held up an envelope. Cream-colored. Unsealed. On the front. To the curator of memory. Inside was a single card. Don't file what isn't finished. Some stories don't want to be archived. Some want to be told. L. Graves turned the card over. Scrawled lightly on the back. Box 13, again tonight. Back at the flat, Jonathan combed through the partial program they'd found in box 13. It lists a 7-scene structure, he said. Each tied to a team member. 5 scenes played. 2 to go. He tapped the final scene. Curtain fall. And it says the last scene must be written by the detective, Eleanor said. So it's Graves. That's how it ends. Or how it restarts, Ezra muttered. What if this has happened before? Graves glanced up from the script fragments. What if this is how the real L disappears, he said. By handing off the story. By letting someone else write the final act. Eleanor tilted her head. You think this is about legacy? Graves stood, walking to the window. No, he said. This is about control. That night, they returned to box 13, again. No ticket stub this time. No candle. No folded script. But something had changed. The theater wasn't empty. In the main floor, one seat was occupied. Far back, in the shadows. Unmoving. A woman in dark clothing. Veiled. Alone. Graves whispered, "We're being watched." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "We're being directed." They descended the side stairs, crossed through the seats. But by the time they reached the lower aisle, she was gone. Only a single item remained on her seat. A writing quill, snapped clean in two. On stage, the house lights rose by themselves. The curtain parted. No actor. No set. Just a desk. A chair. And a page resting atop a black leather-bound book. Graves walked slowly to it. On the top of the page. Scene 7, Curtain Fall. Beneath it. Written by Alistair Graves. The rest of the page, blank. Ezra stepped onto the stage. What is this? Graves sat. The ink bottle beside the paper was full. The pen, not his. It was old. Feathered. Marked with an ivory inlay of the same quill-over-flame symbol. He looked out at the empty house. Then down at the page. Jonathan stood just off stage, whispering. Alistair, if you write it, what happens next? Graves picked up the pen. Looked toward the darkness of the theater. And said. We find, L. Or we become them. He dipped the pen in ink. And began to write. Chapter 9, Scene 7, Curtain Fall. The quill hovered above the page. Ink dripped. Once. Twice. Then, with a steady breath, Alistair Graves began to write. Scene 7, the detective writes his ending. The moment the words touched the page, the air shifted, like the theater exhaled. The house lights dimmed. A single spotlight bloomed overhead, illuminating Graves alone at the desk. Ezra, Eleanor, and Jonathan stood just beyond its edge, unseen, unacknowledged by the theater's sudden transformation. Graves felt it immediately. The heat of the light. The tightening of the air. This wasn't an audience. This was a trial. He kept writing. The detective sees the truth, but too late. The stage was never meant to reveal the killer. It was built to reveal. He paused. The words were difficult to form. His hand trembled. Eleanor tried to step forward. The moment she crossed the edge of the spotlight, a sheet of glass dropped between them, silent and invisible until touched. She gasped. It's sealing him in. Jonathan pressed his hands to the barrier. It's a box. A stage box. And it's closing. In the darkened seats, a figure emerged once more. The veiled woman. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply sat in the same chair, hands folded, watching. Her presence was both spectral and sharp, commanding. Ezra whispered, "That's L." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. Then why doesn't she stop this? Graves kept writing. Reveal the author. The ink bled faster now, spreading unnaturally, soaking into the page like a wound opening beneath him. He looked up and met the woman's gaze. And she nodded. As if giving permission. A voice echoed through the theater, not Graves, not L's, but a blend, male and female, quiet and powerful. The detective always thinks he's the one solving the mystery. But this story was never his to solve. It was his to finish. The spotlight pulsed. Graves wrote faster. She watched him for years. Through mirrors. Through pages. Through the silence between words. He thought he was investigating her. But she was waiting for him to write the door open. Jonathan shouted, "Alistair! Stop writing." Graves paused. Sweat on his brow. Fingers ink-stained. He looked older. "I'm not writing the ending," he said quietly. "I'm writing the beginning." As the final sentence was written, the quill cracked in his hand, just as the one left in box 13 had. The paper ignited. But not in flame. In light. The entire stage flooded with golden brilliance. The script dissolved midair. The spotlight collapsed inward, pulling Graves and the desk into a column of spinning dust and parchment. Eleanor slammed her hands against the glass. No! But as the light faded, the barrier vanished. The desk was empty. Graves was gone. Only the chair remained, slowly turning. On it, a program for rehearsals. Freshly printed. This time, with an author's name. Written by L. Graves. Jonathan picked up the program. Beneath it, tucked between the folds, was an envelope. To whom it may concern. To be opened when the curtain falls. Eleanor opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a handwritten letter in Alistair's precise script. If you are reading this, I have stepped into the final scene willingly. Because the story never ends unless someone claims authorship. Elle wasn't the villain. She was the ink. The structure. The stage. She waited for someone to finish what she started, and in doing so, free her. She never meant to kill. She meant to escape. Now it's my turn. I've written the end. Now write what comes next. A.G. The theater remained empty. But the spotlight on center stage never dimmed. A cue. A signal. An invitation. Ezra whispered, "What now?" Eleanor stared at the program, then at the seat. And said, "Now we find out if the detective wrote himself out of the story. Or into something no one else has ever read." Chapter 10, Postscript. The theater was silent. No audience. No actors. Just the echo of Graves' last words, written in ink and light, vanishing into the ether. Eleanor remained standing at center stage, the program clenched in her hand, while Ezra and Jonathan stood just behind the curtain. It wasn't grief that filled the room. It was something colder. More terrifying. Uncertainty. Because Alistair Graves had never failed to return. Until now. Back at their flat, Eleanor placed the letter from Graves on the desk, along with the program bearing his name, written by L. Graves. Jonathan paced. "There has to be a trail," he said. "He wouldn't leave us with nothing." Ezra shook his head. That was the trail. That whole theater was one final clue, his last case. "Then we treat it as such," Eleanor said. She opened the envelope again. Slowly. Carefully. This time, she noticed something. Folded within the inner crease of the letter was a postscript, written in a smaller, almost hesitant hand. "The author never dies. They just step into the margins." She turned the note over. On the back, a name. Mr. Julius Merton. Retired typesetter. Davenport Road, Highgate. Davenport Road was a winding hill lane, shaded by old trees and older secrets. The house was plain, overgrown, but not abandoned. They knocked. No answer. They tried again. A voice rasped from inside, "Come in." The doors never locked. Not for those carrying paper. The three entered slowly. Inside was a house built of books, literally. Stacks formed makeshift walls. Entire shelves carved from discarded planks. Pages nailed across windows like curtains. And in the center, an old man sat at a desk made from a theater stage riser, his fingers stained with ink. "Mr. Merton?" Eleanor asked. He looked up. His eyes were sharp. Clear. Ancient. "You came from Graves," he said. Not a question. Merton gestured to the seats around the hearth. "I was the last one to set his type," he said. "Back when he first tried to write a story. Before he wore the coat. Before he called himself a detective. Jonathan blinked. Graves was a writer? Merton smiled. He was 100 things. Before the world settled him into one role. But writing was how he tried to make sense of it all. He lifted a book from the desk. Untitled. Unpublished. Inside, handwritten notes. Graves' notes. Scribbled in the margins of every scene, tiny lines that didn't match the story. Until the final page. A single sentence. If they find this, then I didn't vanish, I simply stepped backstage. Merton handed Eleanor a second envelope. No postmark. No wax seal. Just a sentence across the front. To the one who takes the pen. Inside was another page from rehearsals. One never seen before. Scene 8. There had never been a scene 8. The detective leaves, but the case continues. Because mystery doesn't end when solved. It only waits for the next reader to pick up the page. Eleanor exhaled. Jonathan looked to her. You think he's alive? Eleanor stared down at the page. No, she said softly. I think he's writing. Chapter 11, The Next Reader. The sky above Highgate was stormless but heavy, like a city holding its breath. Inside the crumbling book-burdened home of Julius Merton, time no longer passed in seconds, but in sentences. Eleanor held the newly discovered scene 8 between gloved fingers. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. Because the page she held wasn't just another chapter. It was a handoff. Jonathan paced the cramped floor, navigating piles of old manuscripts and broken typewriter parts. Graves always said there were 3 ways a mystery ended, he muttered. One with the truth. One with the lie. And one where no one ever finds out what really happened. Ezra leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, staring at Eleanor. You think this is a game, he said. You think he set this up? Eleanor looked up. I think Graves knew he was walking into a scene that would close behind him. And I think he didn't want us to follow. But he left a page, Jonathan said. Eleanor nodded slowly. He left us a scene. And a direction. She turned the page over. And found something written in the margin. The next reader decides where the story goes. Julius Merton rose from his chair for the first time since they'd entered. His gait was slow, but deliberate. He walked to a narrow bookshelf carved from reclaimed stage wood and pulled out a small black journal. He handed it to Eleanor. It bore no title. No initials. Only one thing engraved on the spine, Box 13. I was the typesetter for the only performance of rehearsals in 1874, he said softly. Or so I believed. But pages like these, they've been appearing for over a century. Jonathan leaned in. From whom? Merton looked at him carefully. From whoever the story chooses next. He nodded to the journal. The last person to hold that was a playwright who vanished in 1913. Before that? A critic. Before that? A reader who never wrote a word but still disappeared holding it. Disappeared where? Ezra asked. Merton tapped the spine. Backstage. Later that evening, the team returned to the beginning, number 17 Marlowe Street, where Horace Ellison had been found, slumped over his desk. Now, the flat was silent. Cleared. Cold. But something had changed. The bookshelves were rearranged. The desk had been moved. Eleanor noticed it first. A thin line carved into the wood grain, not there before. It traced the shape of a quill. And beneath it, a slit, carved into the desk, no wider than a sheet of paper. Jonathan pulled a folded page from his coat. The original scene 1, he said. Horace Ellison's obituary. Eleanor took it. slid it gently into the opening. There was a click. And the side of the desk drawer popped open. Inside, a fountain pen, a small brass plaque, and a sheet of paper that read, "You are now the reader. Continue the rehearsals. Scene 9 begins when you decide it does." Back at the flat, the team gathered in silence. Eleanor placed the journal titled Box 13 on the table. It lay there like a loaded weapon. "I don't think this is about solving murders anymore," she said. "I think it's about storycraft as control. And whoever holds the pen sets the rules." Ezra paced. "So what, you want to take his place? Write the next murder?" "No," Eleanor said. "I want to prevent the next one." Jonathan stared at the journal. "What if the next scene writes itself if no one picks up the pen?" Eleanor opened the book. The pages inside were blank. Except for the first line. Scene 9, the reader arrives. And beneath it, a blinking cursor. Waiting. Chapter 12, Scene 9. The first blank page had always felt intimidating to Eleanor. But this one was worse. Because this page wasn't blank out of neglect or fear. It was blank because it was waiting for her. The Box 13 journal lay open on the desk. The fountain pen sat beside it, still untouched since it had been retrieved from Horace Ellison's secret compartment. The room was silent, except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Jonathan finally broke it. "So, you going to write something?" Eleanor stared at the waiting page. "No," she said. "Not yet." Instead, she closed the journal and rose to her feet. "Let's test a theory." An hour later, the team walked through the narrow gate of Raven's Hire Printing Works, a long-defunct newspaper publisher near Fleet Street. Merton's journal had referenced the building twice, once in 1874, once in 1913. And both entries had been short. The next scene began here. What worried Eleanor wasn't that the scenes had begun there. It was that no one had written them down. They simply happened. The building groaned with age. The doors moaned open under Jonathan's careful push, and the scent of ancient ink and damp paper filled the air. Inside, beneath cracked gas lamps and a collapsed mezzanine, the team found a printing press that hadn't run in decades. Except, there were fresh footprints in the dust, leading to the center of the room. To a chair. And on it, a typeset page, resting atop a stack of old theatrical playbills. Ezra lifted it. "Read aloud." Scene 9, the reader arrives. She walks not to the desk, but to the press. And the press is waiting. The cast is incomplete. The author is watching. But the reader must choose, publish, or vanish. Ezra looked up, jaw clenched. This was already written. Jonathan whispered, but Eleanor didn't write it. Eleanor stepped forward, staring at the words on the page. Then at the press. And the ink-stained paper waiting beside it. She approached the old machine. The tray held a fresh sheet of paper, unbelievable, given the condition of the building. The ink was dark. Wet. Recently prepared. And yet, no one had been here. A sound stopped them all. The press clicked. By itself. And a new sheet began to feed through the rollers. Graves' handwriting. It appeared as if unseen fingers guided it. Jonathan stepped back. "The script's alive." "No," Eleanor said, voice tight. "Someone else is writing it." Ezra looked around, hand near the knife hidden in his coat. "Then where are they?" The sheet finished its pass through the press. Eleanor pulled it free. There were only 6 words. "Turn around. She's already behind you." She froze. Slowly turned. No one. Not behind her. But on the far wall of the building. A mirror. Framed in rusted brass. Clouded, warped. She stepped closer. In the reflection, a woman in a theater coat. Same height. Same posture. Not moving. Not mimicking. Waiting. Eleanor stepped closer. And the figure finally smiled. Herself. But not. Back at the flat, Eleanor opened the box 13 journal again. The next page had written itself. She saw herself in the mirror, and for the first time, the story blinked. Because the reader must not just write, she must decide what the story is about. Is it about a man who vanished? Or a woman becoming someone else entirely? Beneath it, a blinking line. Waiting. She picked up the pen. Ezra and Jonathan said nothing. Because they knew. This wasn't Graves' story anymore. It was hers. Eleanor touched the tip to the page. And began. Scene 9, continued, the reader writes back.
Every mystery leaves a mark. And the next case is already unfolding. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe, like, and share. There are more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Join us in the next chapter of A Study in Secrets.